Chapter 1: The Road Out of Kettle Springs. The frost had not yet burned off the boardwalks when they walked her to the edge of town. Ada Vance kept her chin level and her eyes on the pale road ahead, because to look sideways was to see the faces, and she had already learned that the faces were the worst of it. Not the cruelty of them, cruelty she could have borne, being a woman who had set broken bones and turned breech babies and held the hands of the dying for 11 years. It was the way they would not look at her at all. The way good people she had physicked through winters and fevers and hard labors now studied the mud, or the shop fronts, or the middle distance, as if her passing were a thing shameful to witness. The marshal's deputy walked a half-step behind her, not touching, but close enough that his nearness was its own kind of hand on her shoulder. In his fist he carried her bag. Her real bag, not the carpet bag of clothes they had let her keep, but the leather satchel with the brass clasp, worn soft as a glove, that held the tools of her whole life. The forceps her mother had left her. The scalpels, the silver probe, the little corked bottles. They had gone through it at the jailhouse the night before, laying each instrument out on a blanket like evidence of a crime, and this morning the deputy had latched it shut and would not give it back. "That's mine," she had said. "I bought those with my own money. Earned honest. Judge says they're not to go with you." The deputy had been one of her patients once. She had lanced a boil on his neck that a lesser hand would have let poison him. He did not meet her eyes. "You understand, man can't have you doctoring folk in the next town over and word getting round where you learned it." So she walked out of Kettle Springs with her hands empty, and her hands were the only wealth she had ever owned. The murmur came up behind her like water finding its level, low and continuous, the sound a crowd makes when it has decided a thing and wants to feel righteous about it. She did not turn. She had turned once at the jailhouse steps, and she would not give them that again. It had been 10 days since the Doyle house. She could not stop the memory from coming. It came the way blood comes, whether you will it or no. Cormac Doyle's young wife, Eliza, 17 and slight as a willow switch, her belly grown too big too fast, laid in the great carved bed that Cormac had freighted all the way from St. Louis for his bride. Ada had been called near midnight. She remembered the ride, the lantern swinging, the housemaid's white face. She remembered walking into that hot room and knowing in the first breath that something was already wrong. The wrongness was not in the labor. The labor was ordinary. It was the heat coming off the girl, the dry brightness of her eyes, the flush that had nothing of exertion in it and everything of fever. It had set in before Ada ever crossed the threshold. She had smelled it the way she could smell rain coming, that Swedish sickroom rot beneath the sweat. Childbed fever, or something near kin to it, already in the blood, already climbing. Ada had done everything. She told herself that now, walking the way she had told herself every hour of every one of those 10 days. She had done everything, and she had done it clean. She had washed to the elbow in water she made them boil, though the maid looked at her like she was mad. She had worked slow and sure. The baby came at dawn, a boy, blue and then squalling, and then, God be thanked, pink. And Ada had laid him at his mother's breast, and Eliza Doyle had smiled down at him with her fever-bright eyes and said, "He's got Cormac's chin," and those were near the last plain words the girl ever spoke. The fever took her by the second night. It would have taken her in a city with 3 surgeons. It would have taken her at a hospital in the East with all their brass instruments and their learned men. There was no medicine on the earth in the year of our Lord that could have called that girl back, and Ada had known it, and had sat with her and cooled her brow and lied to her gently the way you lie to the dying, and had not left her side until the breath stopped. And then Cormac Doyle had come into the room. She would hear that sound for the rest of her life. It began as a word, his wife's name, and then it was not a word at all. It was a roar torn up out of the floor of a man, the sound of something breaking that does not mend. He had a fine house and a bank draft that could buy the sheriff's silence and a voice the town leaned toward, and he stood over the body of his 17-year-old bride, and he looked for the shape of his grief, and the shape it took was Ada. "What did you do to her?" Not a question. His hands were shaking. "You came in the night and you put your hands in her, and now she's dead. What did you do?" "Mr. Doyle, she had a fever before I—" "Liar, quiet that first time." It got louder. By the time the neighbors came, it was a thing everyone could hear. And by morning it was a thing everyone believed, because Cormac Doyle was a man of consequence, and Ada Vance was a woman who worked with her hands. And when a rich man's grief needs a place to put itself, a plain woman will do. They did not even have a proper trial. A hearing, the judge called it. Testimony that she had been the only one with the girl when she died. Testimony from the maid, wringing her apron, that Ada had made them do strange things with water and had touched the mistress all over. No word from Ada that carried any weight against a bereaved husband weeping in the front row. The doctor from the county seat, who had never so much as seen Eliza Doyle breathing, opined that a skilled midwife ought to have recognized the danger and withdrawn. Withdrawn. As if the danger were a road she might have declined to travel. As if leaving a laboring girl to die alone were the careful thing. Run out, that was the sentence, dressed up in longer words. Out of Kettle Springs by the week's end, her instruments forfeit, her name a warning. Now the town line was a fence post and a milestone, and past them the plain, rolling gray gold to the edge of the world. The deputy stopped. He set her satchel down in the road, and for a wild instant her heart leaped. But no, he only crouched, unlatched it, and drew out the carpet-bag of clothes she was permitted, and left the leather satchel gaping in the dust with all her tools winking up at the cold sky. "I'm sorry, Miss Vance," he said low so the watchers could not hear. "For what it's worth, I never did believe it." "Then you might have said so." She took the carpet-bag. Her voice did not shake, and she was proud of that, the last small coin of pride she had. Out loud, where it counted. He had no answer for that. Few men did. He touched his hat and walked back toward the crowd, and Ada Vance turned her face west and walked out of the only place that had ever known her worth, with a bag of dresses in her hand, and 11 years of learning in fingers the world had just called poison. The stage came through at noon. She had money enough for the fare and a little beyond, coins sewn into her hem against exactly such a ruin as this. A woman alone learns early to keep something between herself and the dark. She climbed up and took the far corner, and the two drummers already aboard glanced at her, saw a woman traveling alone with red-rimmed eyes and a cheap bag, and drew their own conclusions and left her be. The stage lurched. Kettle Springs slid backward and then was gone behind a rise, and Ada let herself close her eyes for the first time in 10 days. Her hands lay in her lap. She looked at them a long while. Broad palms, blunt, clean nails, a white seam of old scar across one knuckle from a kicking colt she'd tended as a girl. They had brought better than 100 children into the world. They had never once, not once, brought harm she could have spared. And the world had weighed them against a rich man's sorrow and found them wanting. And there was a voice in her now, small and cold and new, that whispered the thing she most feared, that perhaps the town was right. That perhaps a gift that could not save Eliza Doyle was no gift at all but a vanity, and every good she thought she'd done was only luck that had at last run out. She was 3 hours west, and the light was going amber when she found the paper. It was folded into the seat cushion, wedged down where the leather had split left by some earlier passenger, or fallen from a coat, a page torn from a broadsheet and gone soft with handling. She smoothed it on her knee out of nothing but the need to think of something else. Advertisements, a patent tonic, a mining claim for sale, and then low in the column in plain black type. REDWATER settlement in the Western Cattle Country seeks correspondence from women of steady character and sound constitution with a view toward marriage. Domestic skill required, nursing or healing skill greatly prized. The settlement has suffered for want of a capable hand. Serious inquiries only, addressed to the Reverend J. at Wood. Ada read it 3 times. Healing skill greatly prized. The very words that had, 10 days past, become a rope around her neck. Somewhere west of here was a place that did not know her name, that had buried its own and gone hungry for the thing she was, a place that wanted the hands the world behind her called cursed. A marriage to a stranger sight unseen. The terror of it went through her cold, that she would be walking into another man's house, another town's judgment, with nothing to defend her but a past she dared not speak. She thought of Cormac Doyle's roar, and thought that any man might learn to make that sound. But under the terror, so faint she almost mistook it, something else moved. Not hope, quite. She did not think she had the strength for hope. It was smaller and stubborner than that, the same thing that had made her wash to the elbow in a room full of scoffing, that had kept her at a dying girl's side when leaving would have looked more innocent. The refusal to lay her hands down. Prized, the paper said. Somewhere still the thing she was might be prized. Ada folded the advertisement carefully along its worn creases and closed her fist around it, and watched the last of Kettle Springs country give way to open land she had never seen, and did not let go. Chapter 2, Redwater. The stage came down out of the hills into Redwater at the hour when the light had gone gold and forgiving, and Ada Vance sat with her single bag on her knees and her back straight as a fence rail, because she had learned that a woman who slumped invited pity and a woman who sat straight invited only judgment, and judgment she could bear. She had rehearsed the arriving 100 times across 300 miles of dust. She would step down. She would not apologize with her face. But the looking, when it came, was smaller than she had braced for. There was a plank depot the color of weathered bone, and a water trough, and a scatter of low buildings that had the honest, unfinished look of a place still deciding what it wanted to be. And there was one man. He stood a little apart from the depot, hat in his 2 hands, turning the brim slow between his fingers the way a man does when he does not know what to do with them. He was tall and spare and sun-darkened, past 30, with a stillness in him that was not shyness but something more settled, like a stone that had decided long ago where it would lie. He did not wave. He did not smile the practiced smile of a man selling himself. He only watched her come down the steps, and when her boot found the ground he said, in a voice gone rough from little use, "Miss Vance." Mr. Kell. She had his name from the letters, 3 of them, short as telegrams, no flourishes, no lies. That plainness had been the thing that made her write back. A man who could not be bothered to flatter, probably, could not be bothered to pretend. "You had a hard ride." It was not a question. He was looking at the dust on her, the gray of exhaustion under her eyes, and there was no distaste in it, only a kind of accounting. He put his hat on. "Wagons this way, boys waiting." He reached for her bag, and she let him take it, which cost her something, because the bag was the whole of what she owned now, and her hands had grown jealous of it. He carried it the way he might carry an egg, careful, as if he had guessed what it held. The boy sat up in the wagon bed, a thin child of about 8 with his father's stillness worn wrong on him, too old for his face. He had hair that wanted cutting, and a set to his mouth that told Ada he had been told to be polite, and had decided privately against it. When Josiah lifted her bag over the side, the boy drew his knees up and looked at her the way a dog looks at a stranger's hand. "This is Samuel," Josiah said. "Hello, Samuel." The boy said nothing. He turned his face to the hills. Josiah did not scold him. He only handed Ada up to the seat as if the silence were weather, a thing to be endured and not corrected, and Ada thought, he does not force the boy, and filed it away with the careful bag and the plain letters. She was making an inventory of a stranger the way she had once made an inventory of a laboring room. What is here? What is missing? What will help and what will kill? They rode out of the settlement with the sun at their backs. For a long while Josiah said nothing at all, and Ada found she did not mind it. The quiet had no teeth in it. It was only when the last building had fallen behind and the road narrowed to 2 wheel ruts through grass that he spoke. And when he spoke he laid the whole of it out flat, the way a man lays cards face up because he has decided cheating is more trouble than losing. "I'll say it plain so there's no mistaking later," he said, eyes on the horses. "I need a wife in name. My house wants a hand and my boy wants a mother, and I've no time nor talent for courting. That's the half of it. The other half is the settlements had 3 women die birthing in 4 years, and the doc we've got is more in the bottle than out of it, and your letter said you'd nursed and midwifed. I put those 2 wants in one advertisement." He was quiet a moment. "I'm not a man who'll trouble you. You'll have your own room and your own door and a lock on it if you want one. What I'm asking for is the work and the name, not—" He stopped, and the tips of his ears went red, and he finished, "Not more than a person's willing to give." Ada watched the grass go by. She had expected many things. She had not expected to be handled gently. "And my past," she said carefully, because it had to be said, because it always came, and better to have it out on the open road than sprung on her later at a hearth. "You'll want to know what I—" "No." The word was quiet, but it fell like a dropped stone. "I know what folks say about folks," he went on. "I've had it said about me. I'll judge you by what I see your hands do, Miss Vance, and by nothing I hear behind them. If you did a wrong, it'll show in time, and I'll deal with it in time. Till then, it's none of mine." He clicked to the horses. "That's the last I'll speak of it unless you choose to." Ada turned her face away toward the hills so that neither he nor the boy would see what his plainness had done to her. She had been shouted at, spat toward, marched out of a town at dawn with her instruments confiscated. She had not, in a long time, been simply believed capable of good. It undid something in her that shouting never had, and she pressed her lips flat and breathed until the burning behind her eyes went down. The ranch, when it rose up out of the dusk, was hard and honest like the man. A low house of squared logs, a barn that leaned a little into the prevailing wind, corrals, a bunkhouse with lamplight already yellow in its one window. Cattle stood dark and patient on the far slope. It was not a prosperous place, but it was a kept place, everything mended, nothing left to rot for want of an hour's care, and Ada understood that whatever else Josiah Kell was, he did not quit on things. It was the shoulder that decided it. They had barely halted in the yard when a man came out of the barn walking crooked, cradling his left arm against his chest and cursing low. He was young, and his face had gone the gray-green of a man about to be sick from pain. "Horse through its weight," he got out when Josiah swung down. "Come down on my arm against the stall. It's Kell, it's out, I can feel it out." Ada was down off the wagon before she had decided to be. It was old in her, older than thought, the way her feet moved toward hurt while everyone else's moved away. "Sit him down," she said, and her voice had changed, the road, weariness gone out of it, something sure taking its place. "There, against the post. Samuel, is there whiskey in the house?" "No, never mind, we won't need it if he holds still." She was already at the man's side, already peeling his fingers back from the joint, her hands going over the shoulder light and quick as a bird. "Dislocated, yes. Forward and down. What's your name?" "Tom." "Tom, it's going to hurt for the length of one breath, and then it's going to stop hurting, and you're going to feel foolish about all this cursing. Do you believe me?" "No, ma'am," Tom said, and something like a laugh went around the yard, and even there, even bracing a stranger's arm in a strange dusk, Ada felt the old rightness settle into her like a bone into its socket. She set his heel of her hand into his armpit, took his wrist, and told him to look at the barn roof and name the color of it. He said gray, and on the word she rotated and drew steady and firm, no jerk, no drama, just the long true pull her teacher had drilled into her 20 years gone. And the joint slid home with a sound they all heard. And Tom made a noise that was half sob and half laugh and then sat blinking because the grinding agony was simply gone. "You'll wear it in a sling 3 days, Ada said, already unknotting her own kerchief to make him one. "No lifting, no pride. It'll want to go out again for a week or so you sleep with it braced." She tied the sling, tested it, patted his good shoulder. "There, you'll keep." She stood and dusted her knees, and only then remembered that she had an audience. Josiah had not moved. He stood by the horses' heads with the lines slack in his hand, and he was looking at her the way a man looks at water after a long, dry ride, not startled, exactly, but arrested, something behind his still face working itself over. He had said he would judge her by what her hands did. Her hands had just in front of him done the one thing they had always known how to do. He did not say it was good. He did not say anything at all, which she was coming to understand was his highest form of speech. He only nodded once, slow, and turned to unhitch the team, and the set of his shoulders had changed. The boy had come to stand at the edge of the lamplight. He was staring at the sling, at Tom flexing his fingers in wonder at Ada. When he saw her notice him, he ducked back into the dark, but he did not go inside, and Ada understood that too. The house within was clean in the corners and grieving in every other way, a woman's absence in it like a smell. A Sunday dress still on its peg by the door that no one had had the heart to take down. Josiah showed her the spare room off the kitchen, small, swept, a narrow bed and a window that looked east toward the coming mornings. He set her bag on the chair with that same egg carefulness. "It's yours," he said. "Bolts on the inside. Nobody comes through that door you don't ask through it." He stood in the frame a moment, hat in his hands again, and Ada waited, for she had learned that men like this said the true thing last or not at all. "They'll talk in town," he said finally. "Doc Prout won't like another set of hands, and the Reverend'll want to look you over careful before he warms, and the rest'll watch the mail-order woman like she's a play they paid to see. I can't stop the talk." He looked at her, and his voice dropped to the plainness that was the nearest thing he had to tenderness. "But hear me. You earn your place here by being who you are, Miss Vance, not who they say. That's the only accounting I keep." Then he was gone down the hall, and his boots went quiet, and the house settled around Ada like a held breath let out. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed a long time with her hands open in her lap, those hands a whole town had called poison, and she looked at them in the last of the light and could not, for the life of her, make herself lie down. Belief was a stranger thing than shame. Shame she knew how to sleep beside. This other thing, a man's flat, certain word that she might yet be good, kept her awake and staring at the pale square of the east window until, somewhere past midnight, the stars had wheeled far enough that she finally, warily, let herself believe she had arrived somewhere she might stay. Chapter 3, Steady Hands. The first snow of Ada's new life came thin and dry, more dust than weather, and she watched it settle over the yard from the kitchen window of the Kell house, and thought that she had, against all sense, begun to live again. 3 weeks in Redwater had taught her the shape of the days. She rose before Josiah, laid the fire, and set the coffee to boil the way he liked it, black enough to stand a spoon in. She had ruined 2 loaves of bread and a pot of beans past saving before she learned the trick of the cranky iron stove, and Josiah had eaten every failure without a word of complaint, which somehow shamed her worse than criticism would have. But this morning the bread had come out whole and brown, and she set it on the board with a small, foolish pride she would not have confessed to anyone. She was not good at the house yet. Her hands knew other work. They knew the turn of a stubborn infant, the pressure that stopped a bleed, the exact tension of a suture drawn just so. Learning to knead dough and darn a heel felt like teaching a fine surgeon's fingers to plow. But she was learning, and no one here stood at her shoulder waiting for her to fail. In Kettle Springs there had always been eyes, the doctors, the reverends, the well-bred wives who measured a midwife by her manners as much as her results. Here there was only the wide silence of the valley and a man who asked nothing of her but to be who she was. Samuel was the harder country. The boy moved through the house like a small, closed door. 8 years old and motherless, he ate what she cooked and answered when spoken to and volunteered nothing, and Ada had the good sense not to push at him. She had buried enough grief in her time to know it could not be coaxed out with sweets and questions. So she let him be. She left the good end of the bread where he could reach it. She did not tell him to wash or to hurry or to smile. She simply went on being in the house, steady, undemanding, until the boy grew used to her the way a wary animal grows used to a lamp left burning. It was Nella Burke who first cracked Ada's own solitude. The storekeeper's wife came out to the ranch on a Tuesday with a jar of honey and a frank, round-cheeked face that had clearly decided friendship before Ada could object to it. She was 5 months gone with child and carried it high and proud, and she settled herself at the Kell table as though she'd been coming there for years. I told Harlan I'd not have that poor woman rattling around out here with no soul to talk to but Josiah Kell, God love him, who says maybe 40 words between breakfast and supper. Nella smiled. So here I am. You'll get used to me. Ada found, to her surprise, that she wanted to. They talked of small things first, of bread and weather and the price of thread, and then Nella's hand drifted to the curve of her belly and her voice changed. You'll have heard why they wanted a healer, she said. In that advertisement. He didn't say much of it. He wouldn't. Nella looked out at the thin snow. We've buried 3 Ada, 3 mothers these last 4 years, all of them in childbed. Little Sarah Combs not yet 19. Doc Prout, he does what he can, but his eyes aren't what they were and his hand shakes by noon most days, and there's some as say he was never much of a doctor, even sober. She pressed her lips together. There's not a woman in this valley who doesn't lie awake come her time and wonder if she'll see the spring. So when Josiah put word out, he meant to find a wife with healing in her hands, well. There was more than one of us prayed the right woman would come. Ada looked at her own hands, folded on the table. The world had told her those hands were poison, and here sat a frightened woman looking at them as if they were mercy. You're safe, Ada heard herself say, quiet and certain. I've caught more babies than I can count, and I mean to catch yours. You hear me? You'll see your spring. Nella's eyes filled, and she laughed at herself for it and swiped them dry. There now, that's the first easy breath I've drawn in months. Word of steady hands spreads the way water finds its level, slow, then all at once. It began with the Harmon child, croupy and barking in the cold, whose mother sent to the ranch when Doc Prout could not be roused before noon. Ada went with her bag through the gray afternoon, sat a kettle steaming by the crib, and worked the boy's chest with warm cloths and patience until the terrible seal bark eased and he slept. She stayed past dark to be sure the fever did not climb, and when she left, the mother pressed both her hands and could not find words, and Ada rode home in the cold with the old, forgotten warmth of being useful sitting in her chest like a banked coal. It went on with a festering cut on old Tom Avery's forearm, a gash Prout had daubed with liniment and given up as bound to take the arm. Ada opened it, cleaned it down to clean flesh, drew out the corruption, and packed it honest. Inside a week, the red streaks had faded. Inside, too, Tom Avery was telling anyone in the mercantile who'd listened that the Kell woman had saved his arm when the doctor would have sawed it off. That kind of talk did not go unnoticed. Doc Prout caught her outside the church on a Sunday, breath sour with the morning's whiskey, and made no effort to lower his voice. "You'll want to mind yourself, Mrs." He was a big man gone soft, jowls trembling with grievance. "This poking and packing and steaming, it's not doctoring. It's granny woman conjuring dressed up newfangled, and it'll kill somebody one of these days, and then where'll you be? A woman's got no business cutting into a man's arm." Ada held his eye. She had faced down worse than a drunk with a wounded pride, and she found her own voice came level and cool. "Tom Avery has 2 arms this morning, Doctor. I'll answer for the cutting if you'll answer for the sawing you meant to do." A few heads turned. Prute's face went blotched and dark. "You'll answer," he said, "sooner than you think." And he lurched off toward his buggy, and Ada stood a moment with her heart going hard, knowing she had made an enemy and unable to have done otherwise. But the day the ground truly shifted came quiet, and it came from the boy. Samuel had been out at the woodpile when he slipped on the frost-slick rounds and came in with his palms scraped, and one knee torn open through his trousers, and he was trying, fiercely, not to cry. He stood in the kitchen doorway with his jaw set, and his eyes glassy and his knee weeping blood, and every child's instinct in him plainly said to hide it, to bear it alone, the way he bore everything. Ada did not fuss. She crouched to his level and made her voice ordinary. "That's a good clean scrape. Sit up on the bench for me and let's have a look before it stiffens." For a long moment he didn't move. Then slowly he came and sat and let her roll the torn cloth back from the knee. She worked gently, cleaning the grit away, pressing a cool wet cloth to the raw place, talking the whole while in the low, easy stream she used with frightened creatures, not questions, just words, the naming of what she did so nothing would surprise him. He watched her hands. When she bound the knee neat and snug, he flexed it experimentally and looked, for the first time since she'd come, something close to at ease in his own skin. "There," she said, "good as it'll get. You'll have a fine scab to show for it." Samuel considered this. Then he said low, "Thank you, Ada." It was the first time he had used her name, not Mrs., not the careful nothing he'd managed before. Ada. She kept her face steady and her voice light, because she understood that to make anything of it would be to frighten the gift back into hiding. "You're welcome," she said, and let him go. But when she looked up, Josiah was standing in the doorway with his hat in his hand, and the cold coming off his coat, and he had seen it. He had seen all of it, the boy who trusted no one letting her bind his hurt, saying her name. Something moved across the rancher's weathered face, some shifting deep as ice going out of a river, and he did not say a word. He only looked at her for a moment longer than was ordinary, and then hung his hat, and the moment closed. That night long after Samuel slept, they sat by the lamp. Josiah had a broken bridle across his knee and was working new leather through the buckle with a curved needle, and Ada mended a shirt by the same yellow light, and the quiet between them had grown, somewhere in these weeks, from the quiet of strangers into the quiet of people at ease. He spoke without looking up, which she would come to learn was how he said the things that cost him. "You asked me nothing about my wife," he said, "when you came." "It wasn't mine to ask." "No," he drew the thread through slow. "I'll tell you, though, seems fair with all this town's been telling you about yourself." His jaw worked. "Her name was Ruth. She died having Samuel. It was a bad birth, and the nearest healer worth the name was 2 days' ride, and Doc Prute was—" He stopped, started again. "She bled, and there was no one who knew how to stop it, and I stood there in my own house and watched her go for want of a pair of hands like—" He set the bridle down. "Like yours." The fire ticked. Ada had gone still, the needle forgotten in her fingers. "So when they tell me you're this or you're that," Josiah went on, and now he did look at her, plain and level across the lamplight. "When Prute runs his mouth and the church folk whisper, I think on Ruth. And I think a healer who'll come, who'll fight for a woman when the fighting's ugly, is worth more than all the good opinion in this valley. I've seen what your hands do. That's my measure of you, not their talk." Ada found she could not speak for a moment. She had spent so long being told her worth was a lie that a plain man's plain belief undid her more than any cruelty had. "Thank you," she managed, and the words were not near enough. Josiah picked the bridle back up. "Nothing to thank," he said gruffly. "It's only true." But his hand had come to rest a moment on the table between them, near hers, not touching, and neither of them moved it away. And outside the thin snow went on falling over Redwater, quiet as a held breath, covering the hard ground in something soft and new. Chapter 4, The First Delivery. The knock came just after the supper things were cleared, 3 hard raps that rattled the door in its frame and set the lamp flame shivering. Ada knew before she opened it. A knock like that carried a shape to it, a weight, and she had answered 100 of them in another life. The Burke boy stood on the step, hatless, his chest heaving from the run. He was perhaps 11, and the fear on his face had aged him 10 years since noon. "It's my ma," he gasped. "The baby's coming wrong. Pa sent me. Doc Prute's there, but the boy swallowed. "He can't hardly stand up, ma'am. Pa says, will you come? He says, please." Ada was already reaching for her shawl. Behind her, Josiah rose from his chair by the hearth, and Samuel looked up from the cat he'd been petting on the floor, his small face gone still. "How long has she been at it?" Ada asked. "Since morning. It's bad now. It's real bad." "Since morning? A day and a night of it then, and the babe turned wrong." Ada felt the old cold clarity settle over her like a coat she had worn so long she'd forgotten its weight until she put it on again. Her hands had stopped trembling the moment the boy spoke. They always did. "I need my bag from the wardrobe," she said to no one and everyone. "The linen's off the shelf, all of them, and boil water as much as the big kettle holds." Josiah crossed the room in 3 strides and took the wardrobe door before she reached it. "Samuel," he said, not loud, "run and put the mare to the buggy. Now, son." The boy was gone out the door before the word finished. They did not speak of whether Josiah would come. He simply came. He handed her up into the buggy, and when he took the reins, the mare felt his hand and flew. The Burke house sat above the store on the town's one street, and every window of it burned. Ada heard the labor before she reached the door, a low, exhausted moaning that had gone past screaming into something worse, the sound of a woman who had spent everything she had and was starting to spend what she did not. Nella. Her first friend in this hard country, the one who'd brought her seed cake and sat in her kitchen and told her about the 3 graves on the hill. Ada went in without knocking. The bedroom was a furnace of lamplight and the reek of sweat and old whiskey. Nella lay tangled in the bedclothes, gray-faced, her hair pasted dark to her forehead. Her husband knelt at the head of the bed, holding her hand in both of his, useless with love and terror. And in the corner, swaying, one hand braced on the washstand, stood Doc Prute with his coat off and his shirt sleeves bloodied to the elbow. A man trying very hard to look like he was in command of a thing that had gotten entirely away from him. "This is no place for you," Prute said thickly. "Get out, the child's wedged." Nothing to be done but wait on God. Ada did not answer him. She went to the bed, laid the back of her hand against Nella's cheek, then her fingers to the pulse at her throat. Fast, thin, but there. The woman's eyes rolled toward her and found her. "Ada," Nella breathed. "Ada, it won't come." "I know, I'm here now. I'm going to see." She was rolling her sleeves as she spoke, and her voice had dropped into the low, even register she used at times like these, a voice with no fear in it because there was no room for fear, only for the work. "Mr. Burke, I need you to wash your hands in that basin and then hold your wife's shoulders when I tell you. Doc, I'll thank you for more light." Prute drew himself up. "You'll thank me for nothing." "I'll not stand by well, eh?" "Then sit," Josiah said from the doorway. He had not raised his voice. He never did. But the 2 words dropped into the room and everything in it settled around them, the way cattle settle when the man they know steps into the pen. Prute looked at him, and at the width of him filling the door, and at the plain certainty in his face, and the old physician's mouth worked once, and then he sat down heavily in the chair by the window and said nothing more. Ada had already stopped listening to any of them. Her hands told her the story her eyes could not. The babe was breech, not the tidy kind that sometimes slipped free on its own, but the hard kind, one small foot come down first and the rest of it jammed crossways against a mother worn too weak to push. Another hour of Prute's waiting on God, and there would be a 4th grave on the hill, and a 5th beside it no bigger than a bread box. "Nella," she said, close to her ear, "listen to me. Your baby's trying to come feet first and it's gotten stuck. I can turn it. It's going to hurt worse than anything yet, and I need you to do exactly what I say and not one thing more. Will you do that? For the both of you." A tear ran sideways off Nella's nose into the pillow. "Don't let us die." "I don't intend to," Ada said. "Mr. Burke, her shoulders. Josiah, her knees, if you'll pardon it, and hold them where I put them. Steady, both of you. There's going to be noise. Don't let it move you." She worked. She would never afterward be able to say how long it took, only that it was the whole of the world while it lasted. Between the pains, she reached and turned, easing the small trapped body a quarter turn, and then holding, waiting, feeling for the shift, while Nella screamed and Josiah held her fast with his jaw set like stone and his eyes, once meeting Ada's across the ruin of the bed. She found the second foot. She brought it down alongside the first. She waited out a pain that arched Nella off the mattress, and in the ebb of it she guided the hips, and then with a slither and a rush that soaked her to the wrists, the child came, first the small blue legs, then the body, and then with one last turn of Ada's fingers hooked gentle in the tiny mouth to free the head, all of it, out and into her hands. It did not cry. The room went dead silent. Even Nella, spent past speech, lifted her head. Ada laid the babe along her forearm face down, its slick head cupped in her palm, and struck it twice between the shoulder blades, sharp. She cleared its mouth with her little finger. She turned it and breathed once, softly, over its lips, and rubbed the small chest hard with 2 fingers, roughly, the way that looks like cruelty and is the opposite of it. The baby coughed, drew a long, shuddering breath through a face screwing itself scarlet, and wailed a furious, healthy, indignant howl that filled the house to its rafters. "There," Ada said, and heard her own voice crack on the word. "There you are, a girl, Nella. You've a daughter, and she's got a temper on her." Nella Burke wept. Her husband made a sound that was half laugh and half sob and pressed his face into his wife's damp hair. And in the chair by the window, Doc Prout sat with his bloody hands hanging between his knees and stared at Ada as though she had done something against the natural law. She had no time for him. There was the cord to tie and cut, the afterbirth to see safely delivered, the kneading of Nella's slack belly to close down the bleeding that killed more mothers than any breech ever born. She did it all by rote and by feel, and only when the babe was washed and swaddled and set at her mother's breast, and Nella's pulse had come up strong and even under her fingers, did Ada finally straighten and become aware of the ache in her back and the blood drying stiff on her arms. She turned, and Josiah was watching her. He stood by the foot of the bed where he'd been the whole while, and his hat was in his hands, though she could not remember him taking it off, and he was looking at her the way a man looks at something he has heard tell of all his life and never once expected to see with his own eyes. There was no judgment in it. There was no measuring. There was only a kind of wonder, plain and unhidden on that guarded face, and beneath it something warmer and less careful that made the breath catch in her throat despite everything. Neither of them said a word. There was nothing that would have fit. It was Prout who spoke at last, hauling himself up out of the chair and reaching for his coat with fingers that fumbled the sleeve. "Lucky," he muttered, not quite to anyone. "Woman gets lucky once, folks lose their heads." He got the coat on. At the door he paused, and his roomy eyes slid over Ada with something that was no longer only wounded pride but had begun to curdle into something meaner. "Hands like that," he said. "A woman doesn't come by hands like that, gentle. Makes a man wonder what she's seen, where she's been." He let it hang there a moment, watching to see if it landed. Then he was gone down the stairs and out into the dark. Ada stood very still. The old cold clarity she'd worn all night had begun to thaw, and into the space it left crept the first small chill of a familiar dread. She knew that kind of talk. She knew where it went and how it grew and what it could do to a person given time and a town's fear to feed on. But not tonight. She would not let it be tonight. Mr. Burke tried to press money on them at the door, and coffee, and every word of thanks a plain man owns, and Ada gently refused the first 2 and let him have the last because he needed to give it. Then Josiah handed her up into the buggy and clucked to the mare, and they went out of the sleeping town and onto the dark road home under a sky riddled with stars. For a long while neither spoke. The mare's hooves and the creak of the axle were the only sounds, and the cold night air was clean in Ada's lungs after the furnace of that room. Then, without a word, without looking at her, Josiah reached across the seat and took her hand. His palm was rough and warm, and it closed over her stained fingers as though the blood on them were nothing, as though it were the finest thing a hand could carry. Ada went still. She felt him mean to say something, felt the words gather in him, felt him turn them over and hold them back, some vow he was not yet ready to set loose between them. He only tightened his grip once and kept it there the whole way home. Ada looked up at the great wheeling field of stars and let herself, for this one night, feel entirely safe. She knew better. She always knew better. But his hand was warm and the babe was breathing, and for the length of that dark ride she let the knowing go. Chapter 5, something like a marriage. Autumn came down on Redwater the way a hand settles over a fevered brow, cool, sudden, a mercy after the long heat. The cottonwoods along the creek turned the color of struck matches, and the mornings carried a bite that put a briskness in Ada's step, as she crossed the yard to the henhouse. She had lived on the Kell place for near 2 months now, and somewhere in the counting of those days the shape of her life had changed without her marking the hour it happened. There had been terms once. She remembered them plainly. A wife in name, Josiah had said that first evening at the depot, hat turned in his hands, his voice low as a man ashamed of asking. A wife to keep his house and mother his boy, and a healer for a settlement that had buried too many. No expectations, he had told her. You earn your place by being who you are, not who they say. She had lain awake that first night, unable to trust a kindness that asked nothing of her but honesty. Now she woke before him most mornings and had the coffee going by the time his boots hit the floor above, and neither of them had spoken a word about terms in weeks. The arrangement had thawed. She could not have said the day it began to run like water instead of standing like ice, only that it had, and that she had let it. Samuel found her at the henhouse, a basket already in his arms. "There's 9 this morning," he announced. "One's warm still." "Then that one goes to your father," Ada said. "He likes them fresh enough to burn his mouth." The boy grinned, a whole grin, teeth and all, the kind he had not once given her in her first weeks here. Samuel Kell had come to her closed as a fist, grief-shut and watchful, a motherless child braced against one more loss. She had not pushed. She had let him circle her the way a wary colt circles a stranger, and one day he had let her tend a scraped knee, and another day he had called her by her name, and now he handed her the warm egg without being asked and walked at her elbow back to the house, telling her a long, tangled story about a badger. Inside, Josiah stood at the stove in his shirt sleeves, and the sight of him there still caught at something under her ribs. He was a broad, quiet man, plainer and gentler than the hard country that had made him, and he moved through his own kitchen like a guest who had learned, slowly, that he was welcome. He took the coffee she poured and their fingers brushed at the cup, and neither of them pulled back the way they once had. "Burke's got his barn frame up," Josiah said. "Raising Saturday, whole valley'll turn out." He watched her over the rim of the cup. "Nella asked would you come, asked particular." Ada set down the pot. Nella Burke had been her first friend in Redwater and her first patient, and Ada had turned her breeching baby by hand 3 weeks past while Doc Prout stood useless and swaying in the corner. The whole town knew of it now, but a barn raising was a different thing than a sick room. A sick room needed her. A barn raising was a place where a woman stood among her neighbors and was, or was not, one of them. "You want me to go?" she said. It was not quite a question. "I want," Josiah said carefully, "for you to have the choosing of it." She looked at him a long moment. "Then I'll come." Saturday broke clear and gold. They drove in together, the 3 of them on the wagon seat with Samuel wedged warm between, and the Burke place was already a hive of men and hammers and the smell of pit-roasted beef. Ada braced for the old thing, the murmur at her back, the eyes that slid away. She had lived so long inside that murmur she scarcely knew herself without it. But Nella came across the yard with her arms out and her color high and healthy, the baby on her hip, and folded Ada into an embrace that smelled of bread and lye soap. "There she is," Nella said, loud enough to carry, "the woman with the good hands," and she did not lower her voice at all. Something eased in Ada's chest that had been clenched so long she had stopped feeling the ache of it. The women drew her into the shade where the food was laid, and if a few of them were stiff at first, they thawed over the shelling of beans and the trading of remedies, and by afternoon old Mrs. Atwood was pressing her for a poultice recipe and calling her dear. Ada worked because she did not know how to be idle among working women, and the work made her one of them faster than any speech could have. The frame went up before the sun sank, 20 men on the ropes and a great groaning heave, and then the skeleton of the barn standing black against a burning sky, and a cheer that Ada felt in her own throat. Then the boards were laid across trestles for supper, and after supper someone brought out a fiddle. She had not meant to dance. She stood at the edge of the lantern light watching the couples turn on the swept dirt, and she was content to watch when Josiah came and stood beside her, close, his shoulder near her own. "I'm no hand at it," he said. "Nor am I. It's been years. Then we'll be poor at it together." He held out his hand, palm up, and waited. She put her hand in his. They were poor at it. He counted under his breath and she laughed and stepped wrong, and his hand found the small of her back and steadied her, warm through the cloth, and after a turn or two they stopped counting and simply moved. The fiddle wound down slow and sweet. She was aware of the whole town around them and for once unafraid of it, aware most of all of the breadth of his hand at her back and the way he watched her face as though it were the only lit thing in the dark. They drove home late under a sky thick with stars, Samuel asleep against her side, and it was the boy's sleeping weight that loosened her tongue. She had carried her silence so long. In the dark, with his son breathing slow against her and the horse's hooves soft on the road, she found she could not carry it another mile. "Josiah," she said, "there's a thing I've never told you." He did not stiffen. He kept his eyes on the road and his hands easy on the lines. "You don't owe me your past, Ada. I told you that." "I know it. That's why I mean to give it." She drew a breath that shook. "There was a death before I came west, a woman in childbed. I was the midwife. There was a fever in her already, set deep before ever I was called, the kind no hands on earth could turn. She died, and her people needed a name to lay it on, and mine was the name at hand." Her voice thinned. "They called me a killer, Josiah. They took my instruments and they put me on the stage at dawn with the whole town at my back to watch me go. That's who you married. A woman run out on a lie she couldn't outrun. For a long stretch there was only the road and the horses and the stars wheeling slow. She waited for the thing she had waited for her whole life west, the flinch, the drawing back, the reconsidering. "I've watched you work," Josiah said at last, quiet. "I've watched you turn Nella's babe when Prute had given them both up for lost. I've watched my boy come alive under your hands." He turned his head, and even in the dark she could feel the weight of him looking at her. "A town's fear is not a testament of a person. I know what your hands do because I've seen them do it. Whatever they called you back there changes, nothing of what I've seen here." Her eyes stung. "You don't know the whole of it. Then tell me the rest when you're ready and not before." He shifted the lines to one hand and covered both of hers where they lay knotted in her lap. "But hear me now, Ada. I'd have chosen you knowing every word of it. I'd choose you again this minute, the whole of your past laid bare, and count myself the fortunate one." His thumb moved once across her knuckles. "I'll not say the rest of what's in me tonight, not because I don't hold it. Because when I say it, I mean for you to take it freely, not out of gratitude, and not because you're frightened, and not because a boy's asleep against your shoulder making your heart soft." He faced the road again. "You'll have it clean or not at all." She could not speak. She turned her hand under his and gripped it, and that was answer enough, and he let it be. She thought, driving home under that spilled and endless sky, that she had never in her life been so near to safe. She should have known better than to think it. It was 3 days later in town that the first cold finger touched her. She had come in for thread and quinine and stood at the counter of Burke's store while Nella wrapped her parcel, and the noon stage came in off the eastern road in a boil of dust. Passengers climbed down stiff and gray with travel, and one of them, a drummer in a checked coat, a stranger, stopped square in the doorway and looked at Ada. Looked and frowned, and looked again the way a man does when a face swims up out of some room in his memory. "I know you," he said slowly. "Don't I know you? Kettle Springs, weren't you the—" "You've mistook me for another," Ada said, and her voice came out steadier than her hands. She gathered her parcel and went out past him into the white light, and she did not run, though every animal part of her wished to, and she felt his eyes follow her the whole length of the street. She told herself it was nothing, a tired drummer, a common face. But that evening, coming back to fetch a needle she'd left, she came up the alley side of the store where the light fell out the office window, and through the glass she saw Doc Prute at Burke's writing desk. He had paper before him and a pen in his unsteady hand, and he was bent close over the page, laboring at it word by word the way a man labors at a thing he means to get exactly right. She stood in the shadow and read the 2 lines he had already set down, plain in the lamplight, before he blotted them. "To the Marshal, Kettle Springs, concerning a woman lately come among us who calls herself—" Ada stepped back into the dark, her parcel forgotten, her heart gone to stone in her chest. The past was not a thing she had left behind on a road at dawn. It was a rider, and it had turned its horse west, and it was coming. Chapter 6, The Fever Comes. The Kell rooster had not yet found its voice when the pounding began at the door, and Ada Vance was awake before the second knock, the way she had trained herself to be awake all her life. She had learned long ago that a hand at the door before dawn never brought good news. She reached for the shawl folded over the chair, her fingers already steady, already sorting through the small, dark hours of possibility. Josiah reached the door first. She heard the low murmur of him, the deeper answering voice of the Hensley boy who ran errands for half the valley, and then a word she felt in her spine before she understood it. "Fever," the boy was saying, "the little Cobb girl." She's gone red all over and her throat's shut up near tight, and her ma says her tongue's like a strawberry, and the prentice young ones down the creek took bad in the night too. Ada was on the stairs by then. She met Josiah's eyes across the dim front room, and she saw in his face that he already knew what she knew. "Scarlet," she said quietly. "You're sure? The strawberry tongue, the rash that whitens under a thumb, I've buried children of it." She was gathering as she spoke, moving through the cold kitchen with a purpose that left no room for fear. "Tell the Cobbs to keep her from the others. Tell them not to bleed her, not to blister her, not to do one single thing until I come. Water, cool cloths, and quiet, that's all until I'm there." The boy bolted. Josiah caught her wrist before she reached the door, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "How bad?" he asked. "If it's already 3 houses, it won't be 3 long." She looked up at him, and she did not soften it because he was not a man who wanted things softened. "This is how it takes a valley, Josiah. 1 child, then a household, then everyone. I'll need more than my 2 hands before it's finished." His jaw set. "Then you'll have mine," he said, "and whatever else there is." She had been a great many things in a great many rooms, but she had never before had a man say a thing like that and mean the whole of it. There was no time to hold the warmth of it. She took it anyway, a small coal tucked against the cold, and went out into the graying morning. By the time the sun stood full over the ridgeline, Redwater had stopped pretending it was an ordinary day. Ada moved from house to house along the rutted road with her bag against her hip, and everywhere she went she left the same instructions like seeds pressed into hard ground. Keep the sick apart. Boil the cloths and boil them again. Cool water, sipped, always sipped. No crowding, no visitors, no well shared between the well and the sick. At the Cobb place, she found the girl burning like a banked stove, her small chest laboring, and Ada sat with her long enough to bring the fever down a hand's breadth with wet linen and patience, and to teach the mother to do the same after she left. At the Prentice cabin, she was not the first to arrive. Doc Prout was already there, sleeves rolled, and the smell of him reached her before his voice did that sweet rot of whiskey worn into a man so deep it came through the pores. He had the eldest Prentice boy's arm laid bare over a basin, his lancet catching the window light, and the boy's blood already threading dark into the tin. "Stop," Ada said. She did not raise her voice. She had learned that a low voice in a sick room carried further than a shout. "Dr. Prout, that child has fever burning the fluid out of him already. If you open his veins, you'll take the strength he needs to fight it, and you'll leave him too weak to climb back." Prout straightened, and his rheumy eyes found her with the old resentment ready-made. "I was letting blood before you were weaned, madam. Bad humors want a door to leave by." "There are no humors," Ada said. "There is a sick body wanting water and rest and cool air, and you are bleeding it dry. You'll not tell me my trade in front of a Christian family." "Then I'll tell them." She turned to the mother, who stood white-faced in the corner with an infant on her hip. "Mrs. Prentice, whatever else you do, get water into him, small sips, all through the day and the night, until he cannot hold another swallow, and then wait an hour and start again. Cool his skin. Keep the baby out of this room entirely, out of it. Do you understand me? Or you may lose 2 instead of 1. The woman looked from the doctor to the midwife, from the man the valley had trusted for 20 indifferent years to the stranger who had turned Nella Burke's breech baby right way round with her bare hands 3 weeks past. Then she set the infant down outside the door and reached for the water pail. Prout wiped his lancet on his trousers, slow and insolent, and folded it away. "This won't be forgot," he said, and Ada understood he did not mean the child. She had no strength to spend on him. She went on down the road. The days blurred after that in the particular way that only sickness could blur them, the sun rising on Ada already at a bedside and setting on her still there. She did not sleep so much as fall out of standing for an hour at a time, in a chair against a wall, once on the floor of the Cobb kitchen with a rolled apron under her head. She learned the valley the way she had learned Kettle Springs, house by house, name by name, and she learned it in the worst season a person could learn a place. Josiah made the Kell Ranch the heart of it. He did it without her asking, and he did it the way he did everything, plainly and without a word wasted. He rode out at first light and moved his cattle off the near pasture to the far range so the water and the barn would be free. He gave over the long bunkroom where the hands had slept in summer, had it swept and scrubbed with lye and laid with fresh straw ticks, and there the worst of the sick were carried when their own crowded cabins had become death traps for the well. He hitched the wagon and hauled water and firewood and every clean sheet in the county. when a man grumbled that the cobs were no kin of his and the fever was no business of the Kell's spread. Josiah looked at him until the man remembered other business elsewhere. "You've got no cause to spend yourself like this," Ada told him one night, the two of them alone for a moment in the yard between the house and the bunk room, both of them swaying with tiredness. "It's your grass, your name. If this goes wrong, they'll set it at your door as much as mine." "Then they'll set it there," Josiah said. He was looking at the lit window of the bunk room at the shapes moving inside it. "My wife died because no one with your hands came in time. I'll not stand in my own yard and watch it happen to the whole valley for the sake of grass." He turned to her, and even worn thin as he was, there was something bedrock under it. "You tell me what's needed. My word carries here. Use it." And she did. When she said a house was to be shut up, it stayed shut. When she said a family was to send their well children to the Kell barn to keep them clear, they sent them, because the rancher had said it, and the rancher's word in Redwater was as good as law and warmer than most. Ada gave the orders and Josiah gave them weight, and for a stretch of hard days, it seemed the two of them together might hold the line. But the fever did not fight fair, and it did not fight tired. For every child she cooled through the crisis and watched come back, the little cob girl on the fourth day, sitting up and asking for bread, her mother weeping into her apron, there was another the sickness took no matter what her hands did. The youngest Ferris boy went in a single night despite everything, and Ada held his mother afterward and had no words worth saying because there were none. A hired man over at the Doyle-bought spread died raving. The prentice eldest, the one she had saved from Prout's lancet, pulled through. But 2 doors down a family that had trusted the doctor buried a daughter, bled pale, and the contrast of it ran through Redwater like a second fever. That was the thing Ada felt turning under the surface even as she worked, the thing she was too weary to name until it was nearly on her. A valley frightened past its wits does not stay grateful long. Fear wants a shape. It wants a door to leave by, same as Prout's bad humors. And when the graves opened one after another, the old whispering started up again beneath the thank yous, that the newcomer had brought it, that a woman who worked like that among the dying must have known death too well before, must have somewhere left a trail of it. She heard it the way you hear weather coming, a pressure more than a sound. She had heard it before in another town, and it had cost her everything she had. She was too tired to fight it. She could only keep working and trust the work to speak, the way it always had, the way it had to. It was the 9th night, or perhaps the 10th. She had lost the honest count of them, when she came home to the Kell house past midnight to snatch 2 hours of sleep before the cob girl's baby brother needed watching. The house was dark and blessedly quiet. She set her bag down by the door and stood a moment in the stillness, letting the silence hold her up. Then she heard it, a small sound from the loft where Samuel slept. A whimper thin and dry, the sound of a child too hot to rest. Everything in Ada went cold, and then very, very still. She climbed the ladder with her heart slamming against her ribs and knelt over the boy's cot, and even in the dark her hand knew before her eyes did. His forehead was fire under her palm. His nightshirt was soaked through. When she coaxed his mouth open and struck a match with her other hand, the small flame showed her a throat gone an angry, swollen red, and a tongue roughened and bright as a strawberry left too long in the sun. "No," she whispered. "Oh no, not you, sweet boy." Behind her on the ladder she heard Josiah's tread, woken by the light, and then his voice, low and afraid in a way she had never once heard it. "Ada, what is it?" She did not turn, she could not yet. She laid her burning cold hands against the child she had come to love without ever meaning to, the child whose scraped knee she had tended, who had learned to call her by her name, and she understood that everything she was, every skill her cursed and blessed hands had ever held, was about to be tested in the one room where losing would cost her the whole of her heart. "It's the fever," she said. "It's come inside the house." Chapter 7, The Rider from the East. The lamp had burned low twice before midnight, and twice Ada had trimmed the wick with fingers that would not stop moving, because if her hands stopped she would have to feel how tired she was, and there was no room in that small, hot bedroom for her own weariness. Only for the boy. Samuel lay tangled in the sheets, his fair hair dark with sweat, his cheeks the deep, dangerous red she had learned to dread across 3 weeks of fever. He had been talking earlier, thin, wandering talk about a colt in the far pasture, about his mother, whom he did not remember and yet asked for now in the fever's confusion, and it was the not talking that frightened Ada more, the way he had slid down into a heavy stillness that was not sleep. "Ring it out cooler," she said. Not cold, cool. Cold will only make him shiver, and shivering will drive the heat up again. Josiah did as he was told. He had not left the room since dusk. A man who spent his days bending cattle, and whether and hired men to his will had spent this whole night bending to hers, fetching water, hauling the tin bath, holding his son up while Ada spooned broth and honey water past cracked lips. He wrung the cloth with a gentleness that looked strange in hands that size. His breathing, Josiah said, it was not quite a question. I hear it. She laid 2 fingers along the boy's throat, counting. The glands were swollen hard as walnuts, the rash gone rough as sandpaper down his chest. The fever has to break. His body is fighting the way it ought to. We keep him cool, we keep water in him, and we do not let go of him. There is no trick I am keeping back, Josiah. There is only this all night until it turns. Then we do it all night, he said. They did it all night. She showed him how to sponge the boy's wrists and the backs of his knees where the blood ran near the skin, how to lift him without pulling the breath out of him, how to talk low and steady into that fevered dark, so that even in his wandering Samuel would know he was not alone. Once near the black hour before any bird stirred, the boy's whole small body seized rigid and his eyes rolled white, and Ada turned him on his side with a swiftness that brooked no fear, held his jaw clear, and spoke over her shoulder in a voice flat as ice though her heart slammed her ribs. It's the fever cresting. Do not hold him down, let it pass through him. It passed, the rigid body went loose. And Josiah, kneeling on the bare boards with his hands hovering helpless over his son, looked up at Ada with an expression she would carry the rest of her life. A man watching the one thing he could not save being kept in the world by her hands. How do you bear it, he said hoarsely, doing this over and over, someone else's child every time? I don't bear it, Ada said. She dipped the cloth again. I just don't set it down while there's still work in it. Toward dawn the sweat changed. She felt it before she saw it, the greasy heat under her palm giving way to a clean, honest damp, the boy's brow going wet all at once, soaking the pillow, his color leaching from that terrible red toward a pale that was almost gray but not the gray she feared. His breath deepened. The awful shallow panting eased into the long, slow draw of true sleep. Ada sat back on her heels and pressed the back of her wrist to her mouth. There, she whispered, there it is. That's, Josiah could not finish it. It's broken, the fever's broken. She laid her hand flat on the boy's chest and felt it rise and fall, unhurried. He'll be weak as a kitten for a week. He'll be hungry by noon, but he's on the near side of it now. He's coming back to you. The first gray light was coming up in the window square. Josiah rose from the floor like a man 3 times his age, crossed the little room, and stood over the bed looking down at his son breathing. And then he turned and looked at Ada where she knelt exhausted in the wet and the lamplight. And he did not say thank you, because thank you was too small a coin for it. He reached down and took her hand, the working hand, the raw and reddened hand, and he brought it up and held it against his own rough jaw a moment, his eyes shut. Ada, he said, just her name. But the way he said it, low, unsteady, was the nearest thing to a vow she had heard from any man, and it warmed her clear through the hollow of her tiredness. She let herself have it for the length of one breath. Then she gently drew her hand back, because the boy still needed watching, and because she had learned long ago not to trust a good morning to stay good. By the time the sun stood a hand's breadth over the eastern ridge, the fever's grip on Redwater had loosened all across the valley. Ada had walked from house to house through the worst of it, and the worst was passing, the new cases fewer, the sick ones mending. She had earned, if not the town's love, then at least its wary, grudging need. She was slumped at Nella Burke's kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands, letting Nella scold her toward an hour's sleep when the stage came in. They heard it before they saw it, the rattle and harness jingle, the driver's call, and Nella went to the window out of the habit of a storekeeper's wife, and Ada saw her friend go still. Ada, Nella said, there's a man getting down, I don't know him, he's asking Marshal Boone something, she stopped. He's pointing this way. Ada set down the cup very carefully, so it would not rattle in the saucer and give her away. She knew before she reached the window. She knew it in her spine, in the old animal place that remembers the shape of what has hurt you. She looked out through the wavery glass at the man in the middle of Redwater's one street in a fine black coat gone dusty with travel, and the whole long year fell away, and she was back at the edge of Kettle Springs with her instruments taken from her and a crowd murmuring at her back. Cormac Doyle had come west. He was thinner than she remembered, and grayer, grief having eaten at him the way it eats a man who feeds it. But the voice, when it came, was the same that had turned a town against her over the body of his dead young wife. Big, broken, terrible in its certainty. "That's her," Cormac cried, and heads turned all up and down the street, and Ada felt each one turn like a blow. "That's the woman, Ada Vance. Ask her what she did in Kettle Springs." Ada made herself walk out onto the porch. Running had never once saved her. She stood at the rail with her hands folded so they would not shake, and she faced him, and behind her she heard Nella come to the doorway and stop. "Mr. Doyle," Ada said, her voice held. She was proud of that later, that it held. "I am sorry for your loss. I was sorry then. I am sorry now. Nothing on this earth could have." "Don't." He came forward, and the crowd came with him the way a crowd does, drawn to grief the way flies are drawn to a wound. "Don't you speak of her. You let her die. You stood in my house with those hands of yours, and you let my wife and my child die, and they ran you out for it. And now—" He turned to the gathering street, to the pale, frightened faces of people who had buried their own that month. "Now I find her here, playing at healer where you've had the scarlet fever in your homes. You've let a killer nurse your children." Something moved through the crowd, low and cold, and it turned her stomach, because it was doubt, and it was in the faces of people she had sat up all night to save. Mothers whose children she had coaxed back from the dark drew them a half-step behind their skirts. A man she had bled a fever boil for would not meet her eye. Marshal Boone stepped between, big hands raised. "Now hold, the both of you. This is a charge, and a charge gets weighed. It don't get shouted in the street." "It was weighed already," Cormac roared. "In Kettle Springs it was weighed, and she was found wanting and driven out. Ask your own doctor. I've a letter from him your own Doc Prout wrote east and told me where the killer had run to." And there it was. Ada turned her head and found Doc Prout at the edge of the crowd, and the old man did not shrink from it. He had lost patience that month where she had saved them. Everyone had seen it, and a small, jealous, ruined thing in him had been waiting for exactly this hour. "I only wrote what was true," Prout said loud enough. "That her methods are strange, that no one here knew where she came from nor why. A man's got a right to warn his fellows." He looked at the frightened mothers and chose his knife well. "I said all along there was something not right in how she works. Now we know what it is." Reverend Atwood came through the crowd with his hat in his hands, and his good weak face creased with worry. And he laid a hand on the marshal's arm and spoke the words Ada had known. In her bones, someone gentle and cautious would speak. "Perhaps," the Reverend said, "until this is understood for the peace of the town and for the children's sake, perhaps it would be wisest if Mrs. Kell kept from the sick a while. Only until it's settled. No one is condemned, but we must be careful. We have buried too much this month to be anything but careful." Careful, it was such a soft word for a blade. Ada looked out at the street full of the people she had bled for and cooled and carried, and she watched the machinery start up again, the same machinery, greased and patient, that had ground her out of one home already. The frightened looking for a shape to put the fear on. The powerful man's grief given more weight than the plain woman's work. Only this time she had something the last time had not cost her. There was a small boy asleep in a bed a mile off, breathing easy because of her hands, and there was the man who had held that hand against his jaw at dawn and said her name like a vow. She had a place and people and a life half built, and she saw, with sickening clarity, exactly how much of Josiah's standing in this valley she could drag into the mud with her if she stayed and fought. The crowd waited. Cormac Doyle wept and pointed. Doc Prout watched with his ruined eyes. Ada unfolded her hands from the porch rail and made them still. "I'll go," she said, and her voice was quiet, and it carried in the hush the way quiet things do. "I'll take the next stage. I'll not have Redwater torn apart over me, nor a good man's name dragged down for a fight that follows me wherever I run." She looked at the mothers, at the children behind their skirts. "I never harmed a soul in this valley, but I'll not ask you to believe that while you're frightened. I'll go." And in the terrible quiet after, the only sound was Nella Burke, in the doorway behind her, beginning to say no, no, Ada, no, as if a single friend's voice could hold back the whole cold weight of a town's fear. Chapter 8, The Curse a Woman Carries. They came for her word before they came for her hands. Reverend Atwood arrived at the Kell Ranch on the third morning after Cormac Doyle rode into Redwater, and he did not come alone. Marshal Boone stood a pace behind him on the porch, his hat held low against his belt, his eyes on the boards rather than on Ada. 2 men from the settlement council waited at the gate, and behind them, though no one named it, stood the whole of the town's fear. Miss Vance, the Reverend would not call her Mrs. Kell, and the omission was its own small verdict. You'll understand this brings me no gladness. Say it plain, Ada told him. She stood in the doorway with a dish towel still knotted in her fingers, and she made herself hold it loosely so her hands would not betray her. You've come to tell me something. I'd rather hear it than watch you dress it. Atwood glanced at Boone, found no help there, and squared himself. The council has met. Until the matter of Mr. Doyle's charge is settled, properly settled, before witnesses and the law you're to keep from the sick. All of them. No doctoring, no birthing, no calls in the night. The widow, Case's girl, the Ferris boys, the fever house on the creek, none of it. Doc Prout will tend them as he did before you came. The dish towel went still in her hands. Before I came, Ada said, the Ferris boy's mother would already be laid in the ground. That may be. Atwood's voice was not unkind, and that was the cruelest part of it. But a man has stood in our street and named you a killer run out of another town for the self-same crime. I cannot weigh that from a pulpit while you move freely among the frightened. If you're innocent, the settling will show it, and you'll be restored. If you go on tending while the charge stands and a child dies under your hand, he stopped. He did not need to finish. The town would tear her apart, and him with her for allowing it. Ada looked past him to Marshal Boone. And you, Marshal. Is this the law speaking, or the church? Boone lifted his eyes at last. He was a fair man. She had believed that of him, and she believed it still, which made his answer harder to bear. It's caution, ma'am. I've no cause yet to hold you and no cause to clear you. Doyle's charge is real enough to look into. Till I've looked, I'd have you stay clear of trouble's way for your own sake as much as any. He paused. A dead child on your watch right now, and I couldn't keep a rope off you. You savvy my meaning. She savvied it. She had savvied it once before in Kettle Springs, with the whole street watching a rich man weep. Josiah came around the corner of the house then, still in his work gloves, and the men on the porch shifted the way men do before something they respect and fear at once. He set himself at Ada's shoulder, near enough that she felt the heat of him. You're barring my wife from the only work that's saved this valley, he said. He did not raise his voice. He never did. You'll say that to the Burkes, will you? To Nella, who'd have bled to death but for those hands. You'll tell them Redwater's decided it prefers Prout's leeches. Josiah, the Reverend spread his hands. No one has decided anything final. That is the whole of my point. Let it be settled. Let the girl clear her name in the open where it can be believed so no man can ever whisper it again. Is that not what you'd want for her? It was the one argument that could stop Josiah's tongue, and Atwood knew it. Ada felt her husband go rigid beside her, caught between the fight in him and the trap of the offer. I'll clear it, Ada said quietly before Josiah could spend himself against a wall. I've nothing to hide and never did, but hear me, all of you. There are sick on that creek tonight who don't care what a dead man in Kettle Springs believes. Pull my hands off them, and some of them will die who needn't. That will be your doing, not mine. Carry it how you like. She stepped back and shut the door on them, gently, because slamming it would have felt like guilt. The waiting was the worst of anything she had known. She had been driven out of Kettle Springs at dawn, and that had been a clean kind of ruin, swift, total over. This was slower. This was sitting in Josiah's warm kitchen with her satchel of instruments closed on the shelf like a thing under quarantine, while somewhere across the settlement children she knew by name burned, and no one who understood the fever was permitted near them. Nella came the second day, breathless, her own baby on her hip. The Ferris boy, the little one, Tom, Prout's bled him twice, and he's gone gray as ash. His mother's near out of her mind. I told her you'd. I can't. The word cost Ada more than any blow. Nella, I can't. If I go to that house and that child dies, they'll say I killed him, and they'll be believed, and it'll be the truth of me forever in this valley. I can't. Since when, Nella said, low and fierce, do you leave a child to die to save your own good name? It was not meant to wound, but it went in like a needle to the bone, because it was the very question Ada had asked herself 100 times in the long dark, and she had no answer that let her sleep. Tom Ferris died on the 4th night. The word came up from the creek the way bad news always came. A rider, a knocking, murmurs in the yard. He had gone in the small hours, bled thin and drowning in his own throat, the way scarlet fever took the ones it took, when no one thinned their broth and cooled their skin and sat the fever down hour by hour. Ada had saved worse. She had saved the widow Case's girl who'd been sicker than that, 3 weeks gone, and the girl was walking now. But she had not been let near Tom Ferris, and so when Cormac Doyle stood again in the street the next morning, he had a fresh grave to point at. Ask her, he told the gathered town, and his grief was real, which was what made it terrible, a father's true grief bent into a weapon. Ask the healer where she was when that boy needed healing. Oh, she'll tell you they kept her off. Convenient, isn't it, that death follows her whether she lifts a hand or folds them? My Aliner, now you're Ferris boy, how many graves does a town dig before it admits what's standing in front of it? He did not say the child had died under Prute's care, not hers. No one in that frightened crowd said it either. Fear does not reason. It only looks for a shape to lay itself against, and Ada Vance had been made that shape once already and knew how well it fit. She heard it all second-hand, from Josiah, who came home with his jaw set like stone, and his hands not quite steady when he hung his hat. They mean to put it to a vote, he said. It would, the council, whether you're to be held for the circuit judge or, he stopped. Or run out, Ada finished. Say it. I've been run out of a town before. I know the shape of the word. That night she took her bag down from the shelf. She did it while Josiah was out at the barn seeing to a colicky mare, because if she watched his face she would not be able to do it. She folded her 2 spare dresses. She wrapped her instruments, the ones Josiah had bought her new when she came, since Kettle Springs had confiscated her old ones in their oilcloth, and then she unwrapped them again and set them back on the shelf, because they were his gift and she could not decide if taking them was theft or if leaving them was a wound. She left them. She would heal with borrowed tools somewhere else, or not at all. You're going. She turned. Samuel stood in the hall doorway in his nightshirt, his hair every direction, his eyes too old for 8. Go back to bed, Sam. You're going? He did not move. His chin was doing the thing it did before he cried, the thing he hated that he'd let her see only twice, once with the scraped knee, once in the black middle of his own fever when he'd wept and called her by name and held to her wrist like a drowning boy to a rope. You're going and you're not going to say goodbye, like Ma? She didn't say it either. She just went and everybody was quiet and then she was in the ground. Ada's knees gave. She went down to his level on the cold floor and took him by both thin shoulders. I am not going in the ground. Do you hear me? I am alive and I will stay alive. But if I stay here, Samuel, I bring harm on your pa. On you, there's a man who hates me telling the whole town lies, and while I'm here those lies have somewhere to sit. If I go, they go with me. Your pa can hold his head up. You can grow up here without folks whispering when you pass. That's a gift I can give you. It's the only one left. I don't want it. He was crying now openly, furiously. I don't want that gift. I want you. Pa wants you. You're supposed to be ours to keep, he said. He said it. I heard him say. Sam, her voice broke clean in half. You're supposed to be ours to keep, the boy sobbed, and you can't keep somebody by helping them lie. She held him until he quieted, until his breathing evened against her collar, and then she carried him back to his bed, though he was almost too big for it now, and she stood in his doorway a long moment memorizing the shape of him asleep. Then she took her bag and went out into the dark to walk the road to town, where the night stage came through at midnight for anyone with the fare, and a reason to be gone before morning could ask questions. The cold met her at the gate. The valley lay silver under a high half-moon, the road a pale ribbon running east, away from Redwater, away from the ranch, away from the only 2 people on earth who had looked at her hands and called them a blessing. She had made it perhaps a half-mile, the settlement's few lamps small behind her, when she heard it, hoofbeats, hard and fast and closing, a horse ridden the way a man rides when he has just found the bed cold and the shelf robbed of a satchel and a boy weeping in the dark. Ada stopped in the middle of the road. She did not turn around. She could not have said in that moment whether her whole heart was praying he would reach her or praying he would not, only that it was pounding fit to break, and that the hoofbeats did not slow, and that somewhere behind her in the silver dark Josiah Kell was riding after his wife. Chapter 9, The Claim and the Reckoning. The night road out of Redwater ran pale under a thin moon, and Ada walked it with her single bag knocking against her knee, the same bag she had carried out of Kettle Springs, as though her whole life were a thing that could be packed in canvas and set down at the edge of one town after another. She did not let herself look back. Looking back was how you lost your feet on a dark road, and she had already lost too much to stumble now. She heard the horse before she saw it. A steady drum on the packed earth, unhurried and certain, the way a man rides when he has already decided where he is going and only means to arrive. She stopped. She knew the gait of that gelding the way she knew her own hands. "Ada," Josiah's voice came out of the dark ahead of the shape of him. He swung down before the horse had fully stopped, and then he was standing in the road between her and the miles she meant to put behind her, hat off, breath fogging, his face all hard plains in the moonlight. "Don't," she said. "Josiah, don't make this harder than it already is." "You were leaving," not an accusation. A plain fact laid down flat the way he laid down everything. "I was sparing you." Her voice cracked and she hated it. "They mean to jail me or run me off, one or the other, and either way you go down with me if you keep standing between us. You have Samuel to think of. You have a name in this valley. I won't be the thing that ruins it. I've been that once. I know how it ends." He came closer. She could smell horse and cold air and the wood smoke that lived in his coat, and it undid something in her chest that she had spent the whole walk trying to not shut. "Look at me," he said. "I can't. Look at me, Ada." She looked. His eyes held nothing of the town's fear, none of the cold sideways doubt she had seen slide over the faces of people she had bled for. There was only Josiah, quiet and immovable as the mountain that named the valley. He set his hand against the side of her face, rough palm, careful fingers, and lowered his voice until it was barely more than breath, and that whisper landed on her with more weight than any shout Cormac Doyle had ever thrown across a street. "You're mine to keep, Ada, before God and this whole crooked town, and no dead man's grief is going to move me off it. Not tonight, not ever." His thumb moved once along her cheekbone. "I don't care what they whisper east of here. I've seen your hands. I've watched them pull my boy back from the far side of a fever when Prout had given him up. A man doesn't send the truth of his own eyes away on a night stage because frightened people found a story easier to carry. They'll say you were fooled." Her tears came now, hot in the cold. "They'll say the killer got her hooks in the widower Kell. Then they'll say it to my face and I'll answer it to theirs." His forehead came down against hers. "I'm not asking you to be brave for me, Ada. I'm asking you to stand, just stand. Let me put my name in front of the whole of them and dare a single soul to step across it." His voice dropped lower still. Come home and let me keep you the way I've wanted to since the night you took my hand under the stars and let yourself, for 1 hour, feel safe." She thought of the road behind her, and the empty rooms at the far end of it, and every town that had ever handed her a bag and a story about herself she had not written. And she thought of Samuel's face in the doorway, begging her not to go. Of a house that smelled of bread and liniment, and had, without her once noticing it happen, become the only place her name meant anything but poison. "All right," she whispered. "All right, Josiah, I'll stand." He did not smile. He was not a smiling man. But something in his shoulders let go, and he pressed his mouth to her forehead once, hard, a vow with no words in it, and lifted her bag from her hand as though it weighed nothing at all. He called the town together the next morning, and Redwater came, because when Josiah Kell put out word that a thing would be settled in the churchyard at 9 o'clock, men left their fences half-mended to hear it. They filled the yard between the church and the mercantile, the Burkes near the front, Reverend Atwood on the steps with his hands folded, Marshal Boone off to the side with his thumbs in his belt, and his face giving away nothing. Doc Prout stood beside Cormac Doyle, and the two of them wore the same expression, the sour certainty of men who believe the outcome already belongs to them. Josiah walked Ada to the church steps with her hand on his arm, and he did not let go of it. He turned and faced them all, and for a long moment he only looked, letting the crowd go quiet under the weight of being looked at. "Most of you know me," he said. "You know I don't waste words, and I don't say a thing I won't stand behind with my hands or my rifle or my name. So hear this and don't mistake it. This woman is going to be my wife. Not a name only the way she came to me, my wife chosen before all of you." His jaw set. "A man rode in from the east with a dead wife's grief in his mouth and a story to sell, and some of you bought it because you were scared, and scared people will buy near anything. I don't blame you the fear. I blame you the forgetting." "Forgetting what, Kell?" Someone called, uneasy. "Her hands." Josiah's voice went hard as struck iron. "Nella, come up here and tell them." Nella Burke came, round with her healthy child and holding another on her hip, and she turned to the crowd with color high in her cheeks. "You all know how the last 3 went," she said. "Buried mothers and babes both because Doc Prout came drunk or came too late or came with nothing but a lancet. My John was breech. I felt myself dying, and this woman put her hands inside me and turned my daughter and gave her to me breathing." She lifted the baby. "You called her a killer this week. This is the child she killed. Look at her." A murmur went through the yard, and it had changed shape. Then the Ellison boy's mother came, the one whose son had broken his fever on the ranch when Pruitt had wanted to bleed him, and the widow Carr, whose grandchild Ada had cooled through 3 nights, and a rough teamster who pushed to the front and said, only gruff and red-faced, "She set my arm when the doc's hands shook too bad to hold the splint." That's all I got to say, and stepped back into the crowd. One after another they came, the fever saved and the mended, until the churchyard was thick with the plain testimony of people who had been under her care and lived, and the cold thing that had gathered in the town all week began visibly to break apart. Cormac Doyle could not stand it. "Fine words," he shouted. "From a town she's got fooled the same as she fooled mine. My wife was hale and young, and she died under this woman's hands, and no crowd of the grateful will change what I buried." And it was Marshal Boone who answered, stepping forward at last, drawing a folded paper from inside his coat. "Been waiting on the stage 2 days for this, Mr. Doyle," he said. "Wrote to Kettle Springs myself. Not to the men who ran her off, to the woman who nursed your wife before Miss Vance was ever sent for." He unfolded it. "Your wife took to her bed with a fever 3 days before her time, chills and a rash across her chest and a heat that wouldn't break. That's in this hand here, sworn. By the time anyone thought to call the midwife, your wife was already dying, and the child with her, and there is not a healer under heaven, man nor woman, could have turned it." He looked up. "You didn't run a killer out of your town, sir. You ran out the last person who tried to save her. Because you needed the death to be somebody's fault, and hers was the nearest name." The silence after that was the worst kind, the kind that comes when a man hears out loud the thing he has spent a year refusing to say to himself. "And him?" Boone turned his flat gaze on Doc Pruitt, who had gone gray. "Wrote the letter that brought Mr. Doyle West, a jealous man stirring an old lie because a better hand shamed him at the bedside. That's the whole of it, and this town nearly hanged its own good fortune on the strength of it." Cormac Doyle's face came apart slowly, the way ice goes off a river, cracking from the inside. He looked at Ada, and for the first time it was not hatred in his face, but the raw and terrible thing underneath it. The grief he had dressed up as blame, because blame was a weight a man could carry, and grief was not. "She was already gone," he said, hoarse, as if learning it. You told me at the door, and I wouldn't." He stopped. His hands opened at his sides, empty. "God forgive me, I wouldn't hear it." "I know," Ada said, and found to her own astonishment that she meant it. "I've buried mothers too, Mr. Doyle. I know what it does to a man to stand there with clean hands and nothing they can do." Marshal Boone raised his voice so the whole yard would carry it. "Then let it be said plain, so no one here mistakes it, and no rider carries it wrong down the line. There is no charge against this woman. There never was one that would stand. Ada Vance is cleared, and Redwater owes her a debt it best remember longer than it remembered the lie." It was Reverend Atwood, cautious keeper of the town's morals, who stepped down off his own steps then and took her hand between both of his. "We wronged you," he said simply. "The church will say so from the pulpit Sunday, and it will marry you gladly if you'll still have any of us after this week." Ada could not answer him. She turned to Josiah instead, and he was already there as he had been on the dark road, immovable in hers, and when he drew her in against his chest in front of the whole staring town she went, and she wept, but not the way she had wept out of Kettle Springs, hollow and ashamed. This was the other kind. The kind that comes when a person has carried a weight so long they have forgotten it was there, and then, all at once, in the plain light of a churchyard, someone lifts it clean off. "You're mine to keep," Josiah said again into her hair, low only for her. "Said it in the dark, I'll say it in the light every day I've got." "I know," she whispered back and held on. "I'm staying, Josiah, I'm staying." Chapter 10, Redwater's Own. Spring came to the valley the way forgiveness had come to Ada, slowly, and then all at once. One week the creek still ran cold under a skin of morning ice, and the next the cottonwoods had gone green along the water, and the whole of Redwater smelled of turned earth and new grass. Ada stood on the porch of the house that was hers now, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands, and let herself do the thing she had not let herself do for the better part of 2 years. She stood still, and she was not afraid. Behind her, the infirmary they had raised over the winter caught the first true sun. It was a plain building, low and long, with wide windows Josiah had argued the town into paying for because Ada had said sick people healed faster where the light could reach them. The timber had come off Kell land, hauled down and squared by Josiah's own hands, and the hands of men who 2 seasons ago had watched a grieving stranger try to run her out of the street. They had swung hammers for a week and called it a barn raising because that was the only word Redwater had for men gathering to build something no one of them could build alone. But it was not a barn. It was hers. Above the door, Samuel had burned 4 letters into a plank with a heated nail and a great deal of tongue-between-his-teeth concentration. A-K-E-L-L. She had not corrected the name. She had wept a little quietly where the boy could not see, and then she had hung the plank herself. "Your wool gathering," Josiah said, coming around from the barn with his coat over his arm. He said it the way another man might have said he loved her, which was to say he meant exactly that. "I'm allowed," Ada said. "I'm a woman of property and standing now. I heard it from the Reverend himself. Atwood said that. Atwood said Redwater was fortunate in its healer and thanked Providence for the road that brought her." She sipped her coffee. "He looked like the words cost him something. I let him have his dignity." Josiah's mouth did the thing that was not quite a smile and was better than one. Generous. "I'm a generous woman." He came up the steps and stood close, near enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the last of the morning chill, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. That, too, was new, the ease of it, the way silence between them had stopped being a thing to fill. Doc Prout came by the infirmary before noon, as he did most days now, his black bag in his hand and his color better than Ada had ever seen it. He had not touched a bottle since the fever winter. He had come to her the morning after the reckoning, hat in both hands, his face a ruin of shame, and he had said the only apology she ever heard from him. "You'd best show me how you turn a breech, girl, before I kill somebody else doing it the old way." He had called her girl. She had let that go too. A man learning at 60 to unmake everything he thought he knew was owed a little grace in how he said it. "The Hartley child," he announced, dropping onto the stool by the window. "Ears clear, that poultice of yours drew it clean out overnight. Not mine, it's older than me. My grandmother had it off a Cherokee woman who had it off her grandmother. Well, it works, which is more than I can say for half of what I was taught at a great expense in Philadelphia." He watched her grinding herbs at the long table, his eyes gone shrewd and unhappy in the way they did when he was about to say something true. "I wrote a letter back before to Kettle Springs. I want it said out loud between us once so it's not sitting under the floorboards." "I know you did, Ephraim. You've known the whole time." "The whole time." He nodded slowly, absorbing that. "And you let me apprentice to you anyway." "You're a better Dr. Sober and humbled than you ever were proud," Ada said. "And I'd rather have your hands beside mine than your grudge behind my back. That's not forgiveness. That's arithmetic, but you can call it forgiveness if it helps you sleep." Prout laughed, a short, startled bark of it, and for the first time since she had come to Redwater the sound had no bitterness in it at all. "You're a hard woman, Ada Kell." "I've had cause." The letter from Kettle Springs came on the afternoon stage. She knew the hand before she broke the seal, though she had seen it only once, on a bill of sale for a coffin. Cormac Doyle wrote a cramped, careful script, the script of a man who did not write easily and had made himself do it anyway. Ada carried it out to the porch and read it in the light, and Josiah came and stood at the rail and did not ask, because he had learned that she would tell him what she chose when she chose it. "He's had the marker changed," she said at last. "On his wife's grave, it used to say she was taken by a wicked hand. He's had it cut new. It says she was taken by a fever that no hand could stay and that a good woman sat with her to the end." Ada's voice did not shake quite. "He's sent money, for the infirmary. He says he won't insult me by asking whether I'll take it, only asks that I use it for the next woman who labors in the dark so that she needn't die the way his Aliner did." Josiah was quiet a moment. "Will you take it?" "I'll take it." She folded the letter along its worn creases. "Grief made him a monster for a season, but he came all this way west to break me, and instead he stood in that street and heard the truth and let it change him. Not many men can be turned by the truth once they've built a life on the lie. I'll not spit on the effort." She looked up at him. "There's a second page, the town council of Kettle Springs. They've cleared my name in the record and they want me back. New instruments furnished. A house. Wages. Their finest midwife, they call me, as though they didn't march me to the town line at dawn with a crowd at my heels. And..." She tore both pages once, twice, and let the pieces go over the rail into the spring wind, where they scattered white across the new grass like the last of the winter's snow giving up. "I'm Redwater's own," Ada said. "I was made here, out of nothing they could see and everything you could. A town that wants me back is a town that had me and threw me away. I'll not be got twice, she dusted her hands. Kettle Springs can keep its house. Samuel turned 9 that summer, and he was hers now in every way that a child could belong to a woman who had not borne him. He called her Ma when he forgot to be careful about it, and after a while he stopped being careful about it, and that was that. He followed her through the infirmary rolling bandages and boiling instruments, and he had a steadier stomach for blood than most grown men in the county. And Ada caught him one evening explaining fever to a smaller boy with the exact grave cadence she used herself, and had to step outside so the child would not see her face. It was Samuel who noticed first, in the way of children, before Ada had said a word. "You've gone slow," he told her matter-of-fact over supper, "like Mrs. Burke did before the baby." Josiah's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes came to Ada's across the table, and there was a question in them, and a fear behind the question that she understood better than anyone living. The fear of a man who had buried a wife in childbed and had spent every day since bracing for the world to take from him again what he loved. "Yes," Ada said gently to both of them, "come the winter." She watched him work it, the joy and the terror twined so tight in his face that he could not have pulled them apart with both hands. So she gave him the thing she had never been able to give herself. All those years her hands had saved every woman, but were forbidden to promise their own safety. "Josiah, look at me." She waited until he did. "I've caught more babies than I can count, and I've buried the ones I couldn't save, and I know to the hour what took each of them. I am not afraid. I have Ephraim, and I have Nella, and I have my own 2 hands, and I have you." She reached across the table and laid her fingers over his where they had gone white around the fork. "The winter your first wife died, no healer came. This winter the healer lives in the house. Do you understand me? I am not going anywhere I don't choose to go." He turned his hand over under hers and held it, and Samuel, watching, decided the moment had gone on long enough and asked whether he might have his mother's biscuit if she wasn't going to eat it. Child came in January, in the deep of a still, cold night, with the valley hushed under snow and the lamps burning gold in the windows of the house on Kell land. Nella Burke was there, and Ephraim Prout stood in the next room being useful with hot water and being told firmly to stay in the next room. It was easy as births went. Ada had known it would be. She had known her own body the way she knew every laboring woman's, and it did what she had spent her life teaching frightened mothers it could do. Just before dawn, Josiah was let in. He stood in the doorway a long moment, hat gone, big hands empty at his sides, and looked at his wife propped in the lamplight with a small, furious, red-faced daughter against her breast. Ada was worn through and streaked and luminous, the way he had first seen her the night she saved the Burke child, and he crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed as carefully as if the whole world were made of glass. "A girl," Ada said. "I see her." His voice had gone rough. He touched one finger to the tiny hand, and the tiny hand closed around it with the blind, absolute grip of the newly living, and Josiah Kell, who had few words on his best day, had none at all. Ada watched him. Outside the window the sky was going gray, and then rose over the white valley that had taken her in, the valley she had come to as a disgraced woman with a single bag, told by everyone who mattered that the gift in her hands was poison. Those same hands cradled her daughter now. They had turned breech babies and broken fevers and pulled half the children of Redwater squalling into the light, and no one in this place would ever again call them anything but a blessing. "You told me once," Ada said softly, "on the dark road when I was running, you said I was yours to keep, before God and this whole crooked town." "I remember." He did not look away from the baby. "I'd say it again." "You don't have to." She shifted the child so he could see her better, this new small life come safe into the arms of a woman the world had thrown away. "I know it now, all the way down." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and the sun came up over the snow, and she said the only vow she had left to give him. "And I keep you too, Josiah, I keep you too."